to the Let's Talk Crypto podcast, where we discuss the latest Bitcoin, blockchain, and digital asset news.
Hey everybody, hope you're all well. Welcome to the Let's Talk Crypto podcast. This is episode 16. It's the 8th of July 2019, and I'm your host, Wes Carlson. Today I have a really exciting podcast guest on, Matti Greenspan. Matti currently works at eToro, a leading social trading platform, and is well known for his guest appearances on shows like Bloomberg. Matti is often quoted in many publications for his predictions on Bitcoin. He's a well-known analyst within the space and is a massive crypto and especially Bitcoin bull. In this episode, we discuss what has been driving the current Bitcoin bull market. We discuss some fundamentals as well as some technicals. We also discuss the upcoming Libra coin project by Facebook and what impact that should have on the cryptocurrency space. I really enjoyed it. Matti's a great guy, really easy to speak to and very humble. And I'd really like to have him back on the podcast again soon. So without any further ado, let's get to it. Matti Greenspan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking time to come on. Really excited to be speaking to you today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. You're based in Israel, right?
That's correct.
Are you originally from there?
I'm originally from California, and I moved to Israel when I was 12.
Okay. All right. I have to ask, before we go any further, you've probably been asked a million times, but any relation to Alan Greenspan, ex-US Federal Reserve?
No, not that I know of, but he did get me out of trouble in Vegas once. It's a long story. I'll tell you sometime.
Okay. Had to be asked. Look, I've been following you in the press and on social media for a couple of years, and I think it's fair to say that you've got a certain amount of belief in Bitcoin. We definitely know you know what you're talking about when it comes to financial markets and trading. And, basically those are our favorite things to talk about. So, just for our listeners, please give us a little background, if you don't mind. Just like, how did you arrive at being a senior financial analyst at eToro and things like that?
Yeah, so, I've been involved in financial markets for most of my life. When I was a kid, I used to track the price of gold in my grandfather's Wall Street Journal, and I've done paper trading ever since. As far as I started working here in eToro in 2012 as an account manager, and then got involved with Bitcoin very shortly after. Beginning of 2013, the CEO Yoni Assia sent me my first Bitcoin, and the first analysis that I ever wrote about Bitcoin was later that year in 2013. If you'll recall, there was a Cypriot bail-in that happened. They froze all the banks. Basically as a way to stop Cyprus from being a gateway for Russian money laundering. And the price of Bitcoin basically skyrocketed on that news.
Correct.
So it was one of the first cases that we saw where, the news really influenced Bitcoin. Yeah,
I think they call that the Cyprus pump or the Cyprus little bubble, if I remember correctly.
A haircut. They called it a haircut.
I presume that your family comes from a strong financial background, or perhaps your folks that were involved in the financial industry.
That's correct. My grandfather is a self-made billionaire, so growing up, we would always talk business around the dinner table and stuff. It was fun times.
So you were just busy soaking it in as a kid and ultimately ended up in the same space.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. You say you got into Bitcoin. Was it when you were at eToro? Is that sort of when you really...
Yeah. So Yoni Assia sent out a blast email beginning of 2013 saying, what Bitcoin is and how it's awesome. And I immediately, fell in love. I put a post. I was using Facebook back then. I put a post on Facebook going, "Hey everybody, money of the future is finally here." That was before all the FUD in the media and stuff. So that was really my first impression was completely clean. It was the first thing I ever heard about it. And as somebody who had firsthand tickets and watched firsthand what happened in the 2008 financial crisis, I couldn't have been more excited that we finally have some kind of alternative to money that's controlled by governments and financial institutions.
Sure, absolutely. I think all the things that we've all latched onto Bitcoin for. What is your strategy overall with Bitcoin? Do you actively trade it at all, or is it just a buy and hold, accumulate type of strategy?
A bit of both, I guess. You can see my portfolio is public on eToro. So if you go to eToro.com, and then you go to, you search for Mati Greenspan, you'll find my portfolio here, or just click the link in my Twitter bio. You'll find it. So at the moment, I'm holding about 18% of my total equity in crypto.
Okay, that is quite high, considering.
Yeah, it's pretty high from an asset manager's point of view. I mean, that was a lot less a few months ago. I suppose the profits brought it up to that level.
Correct.
And I just, I took some of the profits along the way, but a lot of it, I'm just kind of letting it, letting it continue to roll, as they say.
Yeah. I did actually have a look at your portfolio, and I was going to say, do you think that percentage will change over time? I mean, do you think the longer things carry on the way they are, your risk appetite might increase, or do you plan to just sort of keep it at a happy level?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, whenever you're managing a portfolio, you want to be very aware of the risks, and crypto assets are of the most risky assets that you can find anywhere. Any type of emerging technology is always very risky. So as far as I'm concerned, that 18% is usually a bit more than I'm comfortable with, but because it's mostly from profits, I really, I might snip it at some point, but there isn't much I would want to add to that.
Yeah, it's sort of organically growing with the price increases.
Exactly. It's like a bonsai tree.
Yeah. What about around the $20,000 high? Did you manage to get out some, or did you just
Yeah.
hold all the way through the bear market?
Yeah. In December of 2017, I put out a webinar that basically said how to take your profits from crypto and redistribute them into other markets.
Okay.
I kind of saw it coming. I realized that the Bitcoin blockchain was getting too hot to handle, too flooded, and it's all there. I mean, I could probably dig up the recording for you if you like.
Yeah.
But the idea is that at the time it was quite clear that you don't want to be too exposed when something is skyrocketing on that level. To have some exposure is good, but you're better off being diversified into other markets.
Yeah, correct. I mean, you would have to be incredibly lucky not to get hurt. Otherwise, there's been one of the things I was looking forward to asking you was, you find a lot of chatter on the crypto Twitter sphere about manipulation of price and things like that, and also sort of manipulation of volumes on exchanges. And quite often a target of all the angst are market makers, and sometimes they unfairly, I think anyway, they get a bad rap in this space. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's fair, or do you think it just stems from a lack of understanding on what they actually do and the role they play?
I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to. I mean, there's a lot of different opinions that people have. So maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more about what you're specifically asking.
Sure. I mean, from what I understand, market makers are there to sort of narrow the spread on the books and create liquidity in terms of, so if a person comes onto the one side, there is actually somebody to buy on the other end, and make the spread more attractive. But, often when you look on crypto Twitter, and especially in the crypto space, they will get blamed for market manipulation and for pushing price the wrong way, inverted commas, etc. Do you think it's just purely based on a lack of understanding, or do you think there's any merit to these big bad market makers out there?
So look, every market maker is going to be different in the way that they hedge their exposure. A good market maker is going to hedge as accurately as they can to make sure that if they've got 20,000 units in buy, so that they're going to have something around that level inside of the vault in order to make sure that their holdings accurately represent what their clients are holding. And that's what we strive to do as best as we can. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's an issue of guaranteed liquidity where if somebody places a buy order on the platform, we're going to fill it for them immediately. So that's instant execution at the price that we've quoted. And then some, obviously it's not possible to get a 100% hedge off of that. But what we do is we do our best to make sure that we hedge as accurately as possible what our clients are holding. So that way, as far as, I can't obviously answer for any other market makers, but as far as eToro is concerned, we hold the real assets on behalf of our clients. So if the clients are holding X amount of Bitcoin, we're holding that as close to that amount as possible for them.
Sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, as I sort of thought. Do you see Bitcoin as being uncorrelated to the traditional stock market?
Yes. Yes and no. I mean, there's on a micro level, I think that it's extremely uncorrelated. So basically, on a day-to-day level, if you look at the correlations between Bitcoin and the stock market, or Bitcoin and gold, the correlations are extremely low. But on a macro level, I think that there is a very strong correlation because, meaning like over the course of a year, let's say, let's take a look at 2017. Right, it was an amazing year for the stock market. It was also an amazing year for Bitcoin. And then 2018, there was a lot more volatility in the stock markets. Stock markets plunged several times in 2018, and Bitcoin didn't have such a great year. Now 2019, stock markets are doing great again, as is Bitcoin. So if we look at it like that, we have to understand, what are the drivers behind it, which is, generally speaking, that's all about the central banks and the amount of liquidity that they put in the market. So if the central banks are loose with their liquidity, that tends to float all assets across the board, which is exactly what's happening right now.
Okay. And that being said, if there is that sort of correlation where if the central banks are pumping liquidity into the markets and Bitcoin goes up and so does the stock market, what would the collapse of the central banks do?
Well, let's not try and predict the end of the world over here, right? Let's hope that the system remains stable as much as possible, because collapse of the financial system as we know it would certainly hurt a lot of people in a very big way. I think that we have to always, whenever it comes to financial markets, we have to kind of be optimistic as much as we can. I feel that Bitcoin is a way for people to hedge themselves somewhat, to have some kind of financial assets that are off the grid and independent of governments and financial institutions. But it doesn't mean that the financial institutions failing would necessarily be good for crypto. I think it would be bad for the entire world. And maybe people who have hedged themselves with crypto will have a slight advantage over that, but it would still be a bad situation for everyone.
True, and well put. I mean, I do find that a lot of the time in the Bitcoin space and the cryptosphere space at large, you find, the supporters sort of attacking the central banks. And that, look, I understand that, Bitcoin is sort of built on the premises of being an alternative, but I don't think it would serve anybody's purpose to have them completely collapse. I think everybody would be going down in the same ship, basically. So yeah, I think it's just a bit naive to call for that, and 100% agree with what you say. Okay, well, let's move on to the current Bitcoin price. I mean, volatility has been all over the place. Loads of volume has poured back into the market. The good times are back, right?
Let the good times roll. Obviously, we can't tell the future.
Yeah.
Look, if I would know with absolute certainty that Bitcoin is about to go up further, obviously I would have a lot more than 18% invested.
True.
So, and if anybody was able to predict financial markets with any degree of certainty, they probably would have it made already and not have to, trade it anymore.
Yeah.
Um, with that said, I do think that it's looking increasingly like a bull market as we see it. I mean, Bitcoin is by far the best performing financial asset in the world this year. And at the moment, we're consolidating gains. We're looking at a nice tight range between around $10,000 per coin and around $12,000 per coin. Obviously there's support and resistance levels above and below that at this point. But what's more important is the level of volumes that are rising increasingly. And obviously there's many different volume indicators that we can look at within the crypto market. But just if you look at the amount of money that's being sent over the Bitcoin blockchain, you can see that that's rising very steadily. The number of transactions per second is quite close to the all-time high for
Yeah.
Bitcoin. Derivatives market, so the futures contracts on the CME group and BitMEX futures have all experienced extreme highs very recently. As well, peer-to-peer websites like Local Bitcoins, you can see spiking as well and getting stronger as we go. So we can see very clearly the level of adoption of Bitcoin, more people getting involved. And we have to remember at the end of the day that Bitcoin is a network. So the more participants you have in the network is the more demand on each coin. And that's generally what causes the price to rise.
Yeah, true. And I do receive your newsletter updates, and I remember one of the last couple, I'm not sure if it was the last one, maybe the one before, you mentioned the local Bitcoins spike in volume. When I read that, I mean, do you take that as sort of perhaps more the retail side of things jumping in, or how would you define what sort of signal does that send to you?
So, okay, that's an excellent question as well. So where's the recent excitement coming from, really?
Yeah.
And all of the data that I've seen suggests that this entire monster rally has been primarily caused by people who have already been or who are already familiar with crypto markets. We can see that, and this is consistent with what we've seen in previous Bitcoin bull markets, that at the early stages, it's mostly people who are already involved. And then, other people kind of get in as you go, and as they see the price keep going up and up and up, it causes FOMO and the like. What's been one of the main drivers for this segment of the population is the speculation that institutions are very likely to step in with a heavy hand very soon. We know that Fidelity is already onboarded. Their first few institutional clients. Fidelity is an asset management firm that's recently began testing offering Bitcoin to their clients. They've got about $6 trillion in holdings. So this is a monster really that can very, very quickly open up a gateway for their clients into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Backed, we know, is basically reached some sort of an agreement with the CFTC, and they should begin testing their products any day now, which is it should include futures contract on the NASDAQ, which would be fully backed by Bitcoin. So that itself can also open up a huge gateway for institutional investor funds into crypto. And then we know about Facebook's Libra project, which is a whole different level, which is bringing crypto awareness in mass, and is putting Bitcoin back in the headlines a lot. And that's very exciting for investors as well. A lot of people are speculating that it's going to be much easier for people to buy Bitcoin with Libra, and therefore create another gateway for retail investors. So that's more or less what we see as the speculation driving it. But none of those things have really triggered yet, right?
Yeah.
It's all about to happen, and so we can only conclude from that this is speculation based on something that that will probably come soon.
Yeah, true. I mean, we had a similar thing leading into the launch of the CBOE and CME futures in 2017. Everyone knew it was coming, but it hadn't happened yet, and the price rallied right into it. But the concern is it rallied right into it and dropped like a stone the next day after
Yep.
launching.
Buy the
It's like
rumor, sell the news, right?
the rumors sell the news, exactly. Other things that, I mean, just back on that Libra bit that you mentioned there. So, I mean, what I gauge from what you said is you see it more of as a net positive than negative for Bitcoin in terms of desensitizing people to digital currency, cryptocurrency, lowering the barriers of entry type of thing, right?
Right, because anybody who is just reading this news and wasn't familiar with crypto to begin with, now has a much greater understanding of what Bitcoin is, right? Because they say, okay, Facebook has this new thing, they're calling it a cryptocurrency. And I'm just saying, going through the thought process, right? And then I go, okay, wait a second, why should I trust Facebook with my money, right? And then they get into decentralized versus centralized, and then they understand that Bitcoin is actually decentralized, right?
Yeah.
And that basically increases faith in Bitcoin. And actually, we saw this firsthand with one of CNBC's anchors, Joe Kernan, who basically on air came to the realization that Bitcoin is good because of what he saw was happening with Facebook.
Yeah, so he had the aha moment on air. No, I did see that, and I can just imagine a lot of
Yeah.
people going through that process. In terms of where we are now, I mean, like today, I saw I think it's Peter Brandt posting that his worst case scenario is that we are going to go back sub 3,000, and his explanation was some sort of parabola that he drew, and how if that broke, we could have a painful retreat all the way down. I don't even think retreat is the word. I think nosedive would be the more apt word.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously anything's possible, but I don't know if it's fruitful, like you said, to think too far ahead. It's sort of a if this then that situation. There's a lot of support levels between us and 3,000, and although we've come up pretty quickly, we have built some sturdy bases along the way, in my opinion. And for us to go back to sub 3 level, or to 3 or sub 3, I think would be quite devastating for the market. An 80% drop right now would be horrific.
So to clarify Brent's analysis, and I had a conversation with Tom Lee this morning from FrontStrat, who was basically saying, no, that's not what he said. Brent actually didn't put a price target on it. He basically said an 80% retracement of the parabola that we're looking at. So in real numbers, we're probably looking at closer to 4.5, 5 than sub 3. I believe that it was one of the writers for CCN who probably misunderstood the analysis and put 3K in the headline, which is totally understandable. That happens. I think that Brent could have been more clear and put an actual number in his own analysis, and that would have helped us a lot. But and this is it goes again back to risk management, right? When you're investing in a portfolio, you have to understand that there's a possibility that anything can go to zero, and that includes Bitcoin. I mean, I'm quite bullish on Bitcoin, but I know that there is that risk somewhere that it is possible to go back down to zero. So this is why we only invest what we can afford to lose, and all the usual disclaimers, and then building a proper portfolio helps with that, right?
Correct. Yes. Okay. Well, that clears that up a bit. And I mean, that can happen. The things can be interpreted differently, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was just a small error on part of that publication. In any event, if you had to choose one indicator that, let's call it your favorite, most reliable indicator, what in terms of technical analysis, between defining a bullish market or a bearish market, and then looking at the Bitcoin chart right now, what would you say to our listeners would be your your straw that breaks the camel's back type of indicator that says, yeah, no, look, when we're above this, or when this turns like this, or when this crosses that way, I feel that this is a macro bull market.
Right. So, to preface my answer, I'd like to say that one should not rely ever too much on any single indicator. When we're thinking about financial markets, we have to understand how everything fits into the larger picture. That said, as far as technical analysis is concerned, and I'm not, I'm not a very heavy technical analyst. I like to rely on both technicals and fundamentals as much as I can equally. But also, I'm not the kind of guy who likes to put too many indicators on my chart. So as far as that's concerned, I believe that the regular support and resistance lines tend to play a very large role when it comes to crypto assets, and especially psychological support and resistance lines, which are the flat lines, right? So say 10,000 as a big round number is something that traders tend to gravitate to, and place more weight on than other indicators. If you want to think about real technical analysis indicators, I like to use the 200-day moving average. And that's been pretty telling of the crypto market for Bitcoin anyways. Over the last few years, we saw the 200-day moving average stayed below the price of Bitcoin in 2017 all throughout the bull market. We saw it acting as a level of support. And then in 2018, throughout the crypto winter, it acted as a level of resistance. And then on April 2nd, when we saw that surge, that actually punctured the 200-day moving average quite clearly and decisively. And I believe that's kind of what set us back into the bull market here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we certainly have moved up very decisively this time around. If you look back to 2015, and thanks for the comment on the indicators, by the way. Sorry, I forgot to mention. But if you look back at 2015 sort of accumulation period, it did seem like we took a lot longer to bottom out, and there was a lot longer sort of period of accumulation. So I think
Right.
it's just one little question mark in my mind of whether we have a retracement and have a sort of more extended accumulation around or below 10,000. I tend to agree with you that you can't rely just on a technical analysis, and sort of from a fundamental perspective, it seems like Bitcoin couldn't be in a better space at the moment, just from a development point of view, from these institutions all dipping their toes in, and everything sort of, all the stars starting to align in Bitcoin's favor. But it does feel like there wasn't that extended painful period, where normally you would say the bigger players, would be accumulating. It felt like we left the lows and we're not coming back, in the current trajectory. I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, do you think that the price movement that we've got now is justified based on the level of accumulation that we saw?
So if you're trying to compare 2015 to today, I think that what's important is to understand the fundamental drivers that were back then, which in 2014 we had Mt. Gox collapsing. And Mt. Gox at that time was accounting for more than 60% of all Bitcoin transactions, which is a huge level. And I think that when that happened, I think that it just knocked a lot of people out of the market for good, for good, in a more permanent way, where people just kind of got disillusioned, where, a company, a centralized company had so much power over the market.
Yeah.
And, due to that collapse, it just basically people just stopped talking about Bitcoin for a while. And this past crypto winter of 2018 was a lot different, where there wasn't a specific, let's say, collapse or systemic collapse within the market, but rather it was just that the bubble had been overinflated and some of the air needed to get out. And people kind of understood that this is kind of a waiting game. Let's wait out the crypto winter. And then once we had that surge back on April 2nd, then people go, okay, wait a second. If the crypto winter is over, it's time to get back in. So we had just basically, instead of people going away and forgetting, we had a lot of people waiting on the sidelines, and specifically billions of dollars that was stored in stable coins or on exchanges and ready to be deployed, just flooded right back into the market.
Jeez, that's a great explanation. I mean, even just the point that you just touched on at the end there is that the stable coins, I mean, we didn't really have much in the way of stable coins back in 2015. Well, at least not in early 2015. I can't remember exactly when Tether
There
came
was
out.
no such thing as stable coins.
Yeah, no,
Right.
exactly. So, I mean, it wasn't easy to quickly deploy capital, as you put it. Whereas this time around, people could actually keep money in a stable coin. And when the time is right, the money could move with high volume straight back into the asset. That's actually a very interesting thought there, which I hadn't thought of. Something else I wanted to ask you is that you're not a Bitcoin maximalist as such. I mean, you have a diverse portfolio of crypto holdings. Is that right? Do you?
Yeah. Well, so I want to differentiate between Bitcoin maximalist and Bitcoin supremacist.
Oh,
So I am a Bitcoin maximalist.
okay.
Bitcoin maximalist, and according to the way I define it personally, is somebody who believes that Bitcoin is the backbone of the crypto market and has tremendous potential to heal the global economy. Bitcoin supremacy is a bit different. That's something that I do not ascribe to, which is the feeling that no other blockchains or cryptocurrencies should exist other than Bitcoin. And I just don't feel that's true whatsoever. I feel that there's a lot of projects with tremendous potential, but I do believe, I do feel that Bitcoin is the core that ties them all together.
Sure. I mean, innovation has to come from somewhere. I think it would be naive to think that another project doesn't show potential in some aspect. And I think we always have to keep it in the back of our minds that something better could always come out. It hasn't shown itself yet, and I think that's where your definition of Bitcoin maximalist holds true. Is that for now, Bitcoin is the backbone and is the prevalent chain. But that could always change. And I think you're 100% spot on when you say, maybe a supremacist would say that could never happen. It just can't be allowed to happen.
Right.
I think is unhealthy
Right.
for any market or anything.
Yeah, well, anything can happen, right?
Yeah, anything can happen, sure. But you get a lot of people, even just sort of in the trading sphere of Bitcoin, and that say, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a couple out there that say that for this bear, they're still not sure whether the bear market's over, first of all. But second of all, they say for the bear market to be officially over, they need all the other altcoins to go to zero, and I don't know if it's just to grab attention or headlines, but it just doesn't make sense to me. I can imagine that a high percentage of them will go to nearly zero because there's 2 or 3 or 4,000 of the
Yeah.
thing, but not the main ones, I think it's very, very
I
difficult.
think that there's probably around 90% or more will fail.
Yeah. I mean, which makes sense because of the high volume of them.
Yeah, and well, it's not just that. I mean, we have to remember that an ICO or any new crypto is a startup, right? And startups fail on a very high percentage. And we see that a lot in Tel Aviv, where people have a good idea, a good team, and then it might not necessarily pan out the way that they want to, either due to lack of funding or lack of market responsiveness or whatever it is. That's just how startups work. So if we think about each new crypto project as a startup, we have to understand right off the bat that a lot of them are going to go under.
Good. Well put. Okay, Maddie, it's been great. I just want to ask you one last question. Hold you to the gun.
Go for it.
End of 2019. I know you don't like to make
$100 and $1 million.
Gee, it seems like you had that rehearsed.
Well, it's not my first rodeo, buddy.
Okay, then I'll rephrase it.
Yeah,
I'll
look, I don't
rephrase
know
it.
the future. Yeah,
You don't know the
go
future.
ahead.
I'll rephrase it. Probabilities. What are the chances of us
Yeah.
breaking the 20,000 high in 2019?
I believe that the market is pricing in a 50% chance of that happening. And that is off of actual data, which is compiled by LedgerX. They've got a tool on their website which basically shows, based on the options, the currently outstanding options, what the chances of a specific price target being hit. When I checked it, it was around 50% chance of hitting 20,000 by the end of next year. Which, if you think about it, is a pretty good odds. I mean, 50%. On a coin flip of either doubling or going to zero, I suppose.
Yeah, no, agreed. Okay, well, great. Maddie, it's been awesome having you on. I really appreciate you taking time out today to speak to us. And yeah, I hope to be speaking to you again soon.
You got it.
Thanks, man. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
And that brings us to the end of episode 16's podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please leave us a comment below, like and share with your friends. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to press subscribe and also click on the little bell button so that you'll receive notifications when new episodes come out. If you're listening on iTunes, please leave us a review. It helps get us to the top of the list and get noticed. Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Crypto. Until next time, have a good week.